Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Writer Webinar Series. We are so happy to have you here today for Reignite Your Writing Practice. And if you are a member, welcome back. It's always such a thrill to see your names in our attendee list from time to time. So thank you so much for joining us. But if you are new, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. And we have just a few things to go over before we begin. And number one, and most importantly, is that this webinar is being recorded. So what that means is if you experience any kind of technical glitch today, please don't panic because you will receive a copy of this full recording in your email within a week's time. And similarly, if you are a note taker and you're kind of struggling to keep up with the pace of the slides because we're going to move really quickly today, we have a lot to go over. Again, please do not stress. You're going to receive a copy of that recording and you can watch and rewatch, fast forward, rewind as many times as you like. Number two, we will be hosting a Q&A session once our presentation is over. So all that we ask is just hold on to all of those burning questions until that dedicated time, just so we can be sure your question won't be answered in the slides to come. And number three, of course, every writer is different and every writing practice is different. So we're going to be sharing a wide variety of tips for you here today. But if something doesn't feel right to your writing practice, just throw that part out and keep what does feel right to you. I also wanted to briefly introduce myself. My name is Nicki Porter, and I'm the editor of the Writer magazine. And if you're new to the Writer, we've actually been around since 1887, and we are all about the craft of writing, everything from your initial inspiration to your final publication. It's actually our 135th year in print. And as you might imagine, in 135 years, we have published a lot of writers over the years. And as far back as the 1800s, I spent a lot of times in our archives, and I can tell you, it is so perfectly normal to be stuck. People have been writing about being stuck in our pages since the 1800s, okay? Being stuck has been around since writing was invented. And if you are feeling like this cat right now and feeling stuck and uninspired and not understanding why you're not writing, please know that that is so completely normal. If you feel like any one of these kind of grumpy animals today, I promise you I felt like any of these spaces at any point in my career. In fact, I kind of have to manually restart my writing practice several times a year. So I'm going to be sharing things today that have worked for me, yes, but I'm also going to be sharing things that authors have told us and told the magazine that works for them. But before we kind of dive into how we're feeling stuck and how we can fix that, I think it's important to look at why. And a lot of time it's because we feel like we're missing one or more of these resources. So we don't feel like we have enough time or energy, which is completely understandable in our busy, busy world. Or we feel like we don't have enough motivation, which can be really tough when we're working on a long form project, like say a memoir or a novel. It can be really tough to kind of have enough gas in the tank to get across that finish line when there are so many words to write and so many words to revise. We can also lose motivation if we've just had a string of rejections that can feel really disheartening. And last on our list is information and confidence. And these are kind of two sides of the same coin a lot of times because they both stem from this feeling of, I'm new at this. I haven't done this before. I don't know how to revise a memoir because I've never done it, or I don't know how my work is going to be received. I don't know if I'm good enough, which of course we will talk about all of these things later on. But before we get started, I think it's important to look at three helpful mindsets that kind of will help us embrace change today. And that's why we're all here. None of us would be here at a webinar called Reignite Your Writing Practice if our writing practices were perfectly ignited already, right? So let's look at what we can do. Number one, we can look at areas outside of our writing lives. And, the example that's always given is exercise. So if you have a current exercise habit or you have maintained a successful one in the past, what has worked for you there? What kind of brings you back to that day in and day out? And I know for me, what I've learned about myself is that I really am someone who benefits from a daily walking practice. I feel like my body is healthier, and more importantly, that my brain is healthier. I feel like I work through plot points, I come up with new ideas for essays when I'm out there. But when I don't have a dog in my life who relies on me for exercise, I will make 1,000 different excuses as to why I can't go. Oh, I'm on deadline, or I'm too stressed, or it's too cold. And you know what? I live in Alaska, so it's always cold. So that excuse is pretty terrible. But when I have a dog, and this picture that you see here is not stock art, that's actually me and my dog, Sam and Barry, who goes by Sam, out on the trail. And So what that teaches me about myself when I look at my writing life is that I know that Sam relies on me for exercise, and I may let myself down 1,000 ways to Sunday, but I will never let her down. And so what I do in my writing life is I look for ways that I can form accountability with others. So I can join a writing group or do a writing challenge where people are kind of looking to me to produce work, and I'm going to help them and read their work as well. But you may look at your own life, even outside of exercise. You know, what habits have you built? If you decided that you wanted to read more, how did you successfully make that change in your own life? So looking what's worked for you in the past. That said, we also need to be open to new things, right? So before we kind of strong arm something and say, that won't work for me, I know that won't work for me, we need to ask ourselves, well, have we tried it before? And if we haven't, how do we know that it's not going to work, you know? And even if we have tried it in the past, what we need to remember is that we are not the writer that we were 10 years ago. We're not the writer that we were 5 years ago. We're not the writer that we were yesterday, right? We are always changing and growing. Our work is as well. So if something hasn't worked for you in the past, it doesn't mean that it won't work for you for the writer that you are today. First on our list, of course, of resources is time. And this is probably the most common one we hear, is that we all live in these very busy and demanding worlds, and there are only 24 hours in a day. We can't get any more time. So what can we do? First of all, we need to kind of look at how we can spend time to make time. We actually need to sit down and be mindful about the time that we have and look at how we can spend it on the page. And to kind of give you a foundation to get started, I will share the top 4 times that writers say works best for them to kind of get the writing done. These are the 4 most common times. And we hear first thing in the morning, of course. We hear during a commute on the train and a carpool. I am not suggesting you write a novel on I-95, absolutely not. But I will say that dictation software has improved considerably in recent years by leaps and bounds. And so if you haven't tried it, maybe consider trying to outline via dictation or work on a scenes when you're stuck in traffic, you know, when you're stalled. Another time that we hear is lunch break. If you are a person who kind of tends to work through their lunch break and answer emails and things like that, I completely understand that. I do that all the time. But I would also encourage you to consider taking that time back for you because it is your time. And what you also might find is that your work at your day job actually improves because you've taken a break to do something just for you. You've taken a break to do something really creative. Also, nap time, if we are raising young children, is a key time where we can get work done potentially. And lastly, of course, history is filled with people who like to work after the rest of the world has gone to sleep. That said, the most common time that we hear again and again and again is first thing in the morning. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. I think a lot of us kind of have this editor guy who lives in our brain and likes to tell us that that sentence isn't good enough or that word isn't good enough, or even worse, right, that we are not good enough. But the best thing about that guy is he does not wake up until after our second cup of coffee, right? He is still asleep first thing in the morning, and we can produce this really creative work and feel free. Other reasons are that, you know, especially if we live on the East Coast, there's no breaking news story to distract us yet. There's no main character on Twitter yet. We have less distractions, and we can't have had a bad day yet because our day is just beginning. All of that said, you may be staring at your screen in horror and going, oh, I'm not a morning person and that is just never going to work for me. That is fine. There are no rules in writing. You know, I love to write in late afternoons, early evenings, which was not even on our list, but that's what time works for me. And that's what makes it the best time for me personally. That said, there are no rules, but there are myths. And one of the ones I want to address today is this really pervasive notion that we need to write every single day for multiple hours from Monday through Sunday, or we're not a real writer. We're not a serious writer. Oh gosh, let's look at where this comes from, right? So first of all, a lot of the people who suggest this advice are professional writers, which is terrific for them. I mean, they should be writing every day if that's how they pay their bills, right? But if that's not you, I wouldn't hold yourself to that same set of standards. And even if you do, let's say you do treat writing as your day job, even though you have another one. In theory, we should be in the chair Monday through Friday without fail. And if there are 52 weeks in a year, 5 days a week, we should be in our chairs 260 days out of the year. But we're not, right? We're not, because we take vacation or we have holidays or we get sick or there's a snowstorm and a hurricane and it prevents us from going in. Our kids get sick. All of these things come up. And so I really worry that we're setting ourselves up for failure by saying, we're going to write for multiple hours and never take a day off, or we're not serious about it. There are so many ways to be a writer, and a lot of them do not result in burnout, okay? I mean, any of these solutions could work for you, even if it's not small chunks of time several times a week, which I won't lie, that is a terrific way to continue momentum is by writing several times a week. But if you can't make that happen in your life right now, don't sweat it. Maybe you can just write on the weekends, and do longer sessions then. Maybe you can only write one weekend every month. Maybe you can only write one weekend every quarter. You're still a writer. You're still every bit a writer, even if you only can write 1 week of the year. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that you have to take vacation time. I remember our contributor, Susan Ito, wrote an article for us last year in our November issue called Finishing Our Books in 10 Days or Else. And in it, Susan describes how she and a friend holed up in Susan's house for a week straight, 10 days, weekend to weekend, and really just kind of boiled down and worked on their books. Every waking moment that they weren't spent at doing, meetings or Zoom calls, every moment in between there was spent working on their books, and they held each other accountable. And Susan's book is actually coming out this year, which is really terrific. I remember another novelist, Sonia Kamal, told us that one time she got a first full draft of a manuscript done, an 80,000 words draft, by sending her kids and her husband to the beach one week. So if you only have 1 week out of the year that you maybe can get work done, maybe the kids are at camp, whatever you can do, I wouldn't discount the power of that. We can also look for seasons that work for us. A few years ago, indie author Jess Riley told us that she only writes her novels in the summer because the rest of the year she works as a grant writer. There might only be 1 month out of the year that works for you. So just find kind of a time, maybe it's winter, maybe it's spring, whenever, where you can really get some quality work done. Another kind of concrete tip that we can use comes from David Yoon, who is writing for LitHub. And he wrote that you can get up really, really early just once a week. And he actually suggested 4:30 a.m., which I know is really, really early. But we can do this just once, because as he says, you can't do this often because it'll turn you into a sleep-deprived, cranky crab monster. You'll also never wake up on Monday or Friday mornings. Just trust me on that. So we can go to bed early, early, early on Monday, and then wake up early, early on Tuesday and get a lot of work done if we feel that that would work for us. But we're being realistic in our goals, and we're not saying that we're going to do this every single day, because that's not realistic. And also, if we look at our lives and say there's no set time that I can kind of carve out a dedicated writing habit right now, and if you worry that that's the case for you, you might think that you're never going to be able to produce a book in this way. You would actually be incorrect, because Casey McQuiston, who is the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue, a huge breakout success being turned into, I believe, a film, told the newsletter Sit Down and Write, to be 100% honest, most of my first two books were written wherever I could find the time and space to write them. So writing in whatever kind of scraps of time, in whatever places we can find. We can't be too precious about them. I remember Casey wrote in the acknowledgments of their second book, One Last Stop, that parts of the book were written in the Waffle House parking lot. I have seen novelists write their work in Target parking lots, especially in the pandemic when we couldn't go out. So again, we can't be too precious. As Jessie Q. Sutanto, author of another breakout book, Dial A for Aunties, told Sit Down and Write, the truth is, I currently write in this storage room, yep, surrounded by boxes of diapers and toilet paper and an ugly metal ladder behind me. At some point, I hope to have a beautifully furnished office, but we've got to make do with the space that we have. And if you kind of are inspired by hearing the writing routines of others, you would notice that both of these quotes came from the newsletter Sit Down and Write. You can find that at the URL at the bottom. And I just also wanted to say that I will be mentioning a lot of newsletters or books or other resources that I really have enjoyed, and I think you might enjoy as well, potentially. And obviously none of these are paid plugs or anything like that. These are just resources that I enjoy and thought you might enjoy as well. We can also look at where we are spending our time in order to figure out how we can best spend it in the future. And this works on the same logic as making a budget because time and money are both valuable resources. So, in order to figure out how we want to spend our money in the future, let's look at how we're spending it now. In order to figure out how we want to spend our time in the future, let's look at how we're spending it now. And you can do this just by writing things down with a pencil and paper. 9 to 10, I ate breakfast and answered emails. Or you can use an app. The one I have here is a time logger, and it will show you exactly what you are spending your time on. And then you look at it and ask, what is important to me? So obviously keeping yourself alive is very important. You're going to want to sleep and eat and do all of those things, and working is important to pay the bills. But maybe you notice that you're spending 10% of every day doom scrolling. Yikes. And that does not positively impact your mental health, right? And maybe that time could be spent writing instead. So look at the time you currently have and where you are spending it. But once we identify that time, it's really important to guard it as best as we can and be realistic about this. But what we can do is we can block off time in our physical calendars or our digital calendars and kind of set up an appointment that way with our writing. We can communicate with the people we live with and say, hey, I'm going to be writing during this time. Please don't disturb me. If it works for you, you can put a sign on the door that says, I'm writing, stay away, or else we can put a post-it note on our chair, or we can just get the heck out of the house and get away from all of those distractions. But sometimes, of course, those distractions live on our phones and they live on our computers, and their names are things like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So what we can do then is we can use distraction blocking apps like Cold Turkey or like Freedom that will actually wall off those sites from us and keep our attentions firmly fixated on the page during our writing time. And lastly, and I think most importantly, we can identify how in specific concrete ways that we want to spend our time. So we're not going to say, I'm going to wake up at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning and I'm going to write, because that's kind of a loosey-goosey, nebulous goal, right? Instead, what we can say is, I'm going to wake up at Sunday at 8 a.m. and I am going to write chapter 4, or I'm going to revise chapter 16, or I'm going to write that essay that I've been thinking about. We assign a set task to the amount of time that we have. And some of this comes from a tip that Whitney Shar shared with us a few years ago about revision, which is about turning this kind of big abstract concept of revision into a series of set tasks that we can check off and feel satisfaction for checking them off. And what Whitney told us that she does is she actually divides her list based on the amount of time that she thinks they will take. So to give you an example of what this might look like, we have our list of small tasks, medium tasks, and large ones. So let's say if I were working on a rom-com that is set in the 1950s, and in one scene, my character is walking through the theater district, and I want to know what she might have seen on a marquee. This is probably like a 10-minute Google search, right? So if I arrive to the doctor's office a little early and I find myself with 10 minutes of time, I'm going to Google this and I'm going to check this off the list, and that's one thing sorted in this kind of this found pocket of time. But then if I have a nice long Saturday morning writing session, then I'm going to start working on taking that cardboard-like secondary character and making them feel more fleshed out and real. I'm going to assign a task to each pocket of time that I find. And, I will admit that these seem very revision oriented, but they don't have to just be for revision. You can be thinking up titles, you can be searching for new places to publish your work, you can, assign set amounts of time to begin that short story that you've always wanted to work on. All of these times we can assign ourselves tasks. That said, maybe you are not at a point in your writing life where you have a set project in mind. You would be happy with just free writing. I think that's incredible. And what I would recommend for you, especially, is to work on right now with your free writing sessions, work on building a regular writing habit. Because when you do identify a project that you want to work on, whether that's an essay or a poem or short story, whatever, you are going to benefit so much from having that writing habit under your belt. So start small. Okay, it's really important, as we said, to be realistic. So we start with 5-minute pockets of time, and then we build up to 10, and then maybe we build up to 20. And we can just set a timer on our phone, or actually this picture here I have is from a website called 20-Minute Candles. They're a company that makes candles, as the name implies, that burns for about 20 minutes. So maybe every morning, Monday through Friday, you light the candle, you write until it goes out, and that's 20 minutes that you spent writing that you didn't have yesterday, and then you go about your day, right? But maybe you have time. What you feel like you're lacking is energy. This is a huge one, and I don't know that we talk about it enough because our energy, not only can you feel a writer's energy on the page, I absolutely believe that, but our energy and our attention is also pulled in kind of 1,000 different directions in the busy world that we live in. So we also need to remember that our physical energy and our mental energy, they're not these kind of two separate wells. If we don't have any physical energy because we're stressed or burnt out or whatever, we're not going to be able to find any for the page either. We can't bring creativity from a dry well. So if you are feeling like this, it would be really it would be disingenuous for me at best and really harmful for me at worst to pretend that you can just write your way through it, because you can't. You're gonna need to take some time away to kind of rest and recover. And if this is kind of how you're feeling right now, is, I am just completely low on energy and I need time to recover. Or maybe you have things going on in your life, like you are raising young children or caretaking for other older adults. What we can do is I would actually suggest reading a book called Wild Words by Nicole Gulata. And this book takes a gentler approach to the writing life than kind of this world that we live in that's very work, 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 and results, results, results driven. It's a much gentler approach. And actually, it was written after the birth of Nicole's first child, as the author was kind of struggling to fit writing back into her life. So if this sounds like you, if this sounds like a period of your life that you could benefit from a gentler approach and embracing the current season that you're in instead of kind of lamenting it, this is the book I would recommend for you. But maybe we don't feel like our wells are completely empty. Maybe we just want tips on how to use our energy more wisely on the page. And in that case, I have a bunch of tips for you. And number one is to kind of look at our calendars and see where in our given month or a given week are we probably going to have more energy, and when are we going to have the least. So in my life, I work on a monthly magazine, which means once a month I go to press, which means once a month I kind of turn into that sleep-deprived, cranky crab monster that David Yoon was talking about earlier. And so I know that entire week, I just block it off in red on the calendar. Those are my red days. And I know that I'm not going to be my best creative self during those days. And I don't expect myself to, because what's more, I have 3 full weeks of green days when I'm not on deadline, and I can really get the work done. So look at your own calendars and see if you can identify any days that either are green and you can do a lot of writing on those days, or at the very least, just find your red days and kind of outline them and know that the work's not going to happen on those days, and that's perfectly fine. We can also look for ways to kind of re-energize us. And for me, this is absolutely writing conferences, which I always leave kind of really exhausted from a social standpoint because I'm an introvert and it's a lot of talking. But then I always want to kind of hold myself up and write when I get home, and I produce such good work. But maybe for you, what energizes you isn't actually any of the writing things that I have listed here. Maybe it's gardening, or it's taking long walks, whatever you need to do to kind of refill that energy. We can be mindful of when we feel like we kind of have our most creative energy, and look and see see if we can find things in our life that we can actually point to and say, yes, this is something that has re-energized me. This is something I need to do more of in the future. But also, we can just accept that sometimes we're going to need to take some time away because we are feeling just completely exhausted. The key here, I am absolutely not anti-break, but the key here is, if we can, to learn to stop before we kind of run out of gas, before we run out of steam. And here's why. It's because, if at all possible, before we take kind of an extended break, we're going to try, if we have any little bit of energy remaining, to kind of lessen our pain of re-entry when we come back to the work. We're gonna write down, here's what I need to do next. Here's what I was working on. Here's what I was about to look up, or what I was about to research. That way, you're gonna spend less energy when you come back to the page figuring out what the heck you were working on. And that's why when we take a break, we need to do it again while we still have a little bit of gas in the tank. And if you find that this works for you, you can actually do it every single time you stop writing for the day. You can leave a little sentence that says, hey, do this next. Or you can leave a post-it on your computer. You can have a little paragraph at the top of your draft that tells you what to do next. That way you again spend less energy figuring out what the heck to work on when you come back. And we shouldn't be afraid of shortcuts, anything that'll help us get in the writing mindset quicker. And I realize all of this sounds a little Pavlovian, but hey, if it works, who are we to deny science, right? So if we are working on a manuscript that is set in the 1970s, we can make a project playlist full of these kind of kick butt 1970s songs that when we hear them, we immediately are transported to our kind of world that we live in the pages of our novel, or just get in that writing creative mindset. We can drink a certain flavor of tea. We can burn a specific candle. All of these things are going to cue us into that mindset that much quicker. And we can also look for shortcuts that we can take on the page. This tip is all about get there, right? And it comes from author David Dalglish, who shared this in a great thread on Twitter. And it's about how this would work in kind of your writing life is, let's say you're writing a novel and your characters have just decided to go rob a bank and they're in their bunker, and you know exactly what is going to happen when they get to that bank, and you are so excited to write about what happens when they get to that bank, but you just don't know how they get to the bank. Like, are they in one car? Are they two? Do they need to take a van? Are they walking? How much does the reader need to know? Just stop. You don't have to figure all of this out right now. Instead, what you can do is type get there in these brackets here. And I will tell you, I looked up what they were called. Some people call them angle brackets. Some people call them greater than, less than signs. I'm just going to call them carety brackets. But the point is, you never use them in a kind of a regular writing sentence. And so what you're doing is that when you're done, you go back and use your search function to find any of these carety brackets in the draft that'll show you things that you skipped on your first pass through. And then what you're going to do is use these things to populate that to-do list we were talking about earlier with the short, medium, and long tasks to work on. So every time you see one, just write it on your list. And a lot of them will be very small things. The point is just to not get so hung up on these small details that we lose all our momentum, because our energy is precious and we need to reserve it as much as we can. But maybe you have energy, but you're just lacking the motivation to finish a project that you started. And this is a huge one, especially when we're working on longer projects, right? So what we can do is look for ways to be held accountable to ourselves and to others. And if you're interested in kind of forming accountability relationships with other people, we did do a webinar on this last year called Building the Best Support System for Your Writing. If you're a member of the Writer, you can find it on your dashboard, but we're also going to be sharing some tips today on how we can do that. And number one, the easiest solution is we can just write with somebody else. We can feel less alone on the page, and we can also be held accountable and less likely to look at our distracting websites when we have someone else in the room with us. So we can do this on Zoom. We can do this in real life with a friend, but maybe, if you don't have a friend or you don't want to commit to kind of one time every week or every month where you write together, you can use sites like focusmate.com, which will actually pair you up with someone during a pocket of your free time where you just work on stuff together on Zoom calls, and you don't know them, they don't know you, but you introduce yourself and then you just work together. And there are actually 3 free sessions a week, so this isn't something that you would need to spend money on. If you don't mind spending a little money and you think that you would benefit from a group environment, you may want to look at work gyms, which are something that really took off in the pandemic. And this is when, basically it's the same principle as you would join a fitness class from week to week and be in a group of people who are all kind of focused on that one specific task together of working out. So here a moderator is going to say, hello, welcome everybody. We're about to begin our first work session. You all work together on camera, and then the moderator will call a break, and you are free to socialize with other people or grab a snack or stretch. So if this is something that you think might work for you, you can find them at Ultra Working or Cave J. One of our longtime contributors, Anika, wrote a great article on how to form critiqueless partners in our July issue, and just suggested a lot of great ways that we can kind of form partnerships with other people. Like we can have check-ins with other writers, either monthly or weekly, whatever, where we just hop on camera or go to the coffee shop and say, what's going on in your writing life? What are you working on? What's kicking your butt this week? What do you need help with? We can also join a group with the same goal, like we can form a first-time novelist club. Or after a writing session, maybe we just send one sentence to a friend as kind of proof that we made it to the page one day. And as Anika says, when I do sentence swaps with a writing partner, I'm extra motivated to show up to the page, even if one sentence is all I produce. That's still one more sentence than I had the day before, right? But I know the next question we always have is, well, I'm interested in this, but how do I meet other writers? How do I find these accountability partners? And an easy thing to do is to look online. And a lot of online communities are based around writing challenges. And NaNoWriMo is probably the most famous writing challenge. And if you're unfamiliar, it stands for National Novel Writing Month, which is every November. And during November, challenge participants are encouraged to try to write 50,000 words of a novel during this 1 month. And that is a tall order, but it works. I mean, there have been tons of successful, famous examples that have come out of this program, like Water for Elephants, like The Night Circus, which are two major bestsellers. But moreover, this community is active all year long, and they do several smaller challenges like Camp NaNoWriMo throughout the year. So if you want something kind of big and existing and very popular, this might be an option for you. Another writing challenge is NaPoWriMo. And this is actually no relation to NaNoWriMo, even though the names are very similar. But in NaPoWriMo, challenge participants are encouraged to write a poem every day, which is National Poetry and Writing Month. It's April, so write a poem each day in April. And the site will post prompts every single day in case you're not feeling like you have any motivation that day or inspiration. And I will tell you, the prompts are terrific. I personally love this challenge. I think after a long, dark winter, I love the challenge of writing these little poems. And then by the end of it, I have a whole stack of poems that were inspired by all these terrific prompts that I wouldn't have had before. So I love this one, highly encourage it. But another popular one that happens during summer, not spring, is 1,000 Words of Summer. And this is actually hosted by Jamie Attenberg, who's a best-selling novelist. And very popular, 15,000 members strong. It has its own Slack while the challenge is going on. And in it, every single day, writers are encouraged to write 1,000 words. That said, I do have to be the bearer of bad news and say that the main 1,000 Words of Summer has already happened this summer, but all hope is not lost. You can do the mini 1,000, which is also hosted by Jamie. It's actually happening in a couple weeks, August 7th to the 12th. It is only 6 days. And if you are curious about writing challenges and how they might work for you, I would highly encourage you to try this. It's 6 days, but you'd write 6,000 words. You can use the hashtag mini1000, even though there is no dedicated Slack, and you can find that at mini1000.substack.com. Again, right around the corner. That said, when I think we are about to embark on any writing challenge, even a small one, I think it's important to be, again, realistic and understand that there may be a page or a day when we just can't make it to the page, and that's when I use what I call grace days, which are my own personal set of get out of challenge free cards for the days when I am too stressed or, anxious or on deadline, and I can't make it to the challenge that day. And I know that's fine because I have this kind of pool of grace days to use from. What you could do is if you were writing in a word count linked challenge, like NaNoWriMo or 1,000 Words of Summer, you could say, I'm going to write extra in the first couple days when I'm still really excited about it. And that's going to give you a much needed buffer later in the challenge when kind of your motivation is waning a little bit. So come out hot right out of the gate, in other words. We can also be realistic about our writing expectations by doing real writer's math and not fantasy writer's math, okay? And real writer's math comes to us from Kate McKean, who writes the terrific Agents and Books newsletter. I can't recommend that newsletter enough. But real writer's math is all about being realistic. So fantasy writer's math is kind of when we look at a perfect writing session and maybe we wrote 2,000 words and we're like, oh, I could do this every single day, Monday through Friday, and I'm going to finish my book in no time. But we forget that not every writing session is going to go perfectly. We're not machines. We're not going to, output the same amount of work like that, right? So what we can do instead is be realistic and do real writer's math, which is taking our average writing output, not our perfect writing output, taking our average and even cutting that in half, because as Kate says, it will probably take you twice as long as you expect when life gets in the way. If you'd like to join an online community of writers to find, critique partners or accountability buddies, but you don't want to kind of the challenge aspect, that strings attached thing involved, what I always recommend is looking for communities where you exist online already. So if you are hanging out on Twitter all of the time anyway, look for writing hashtags. You can kind of join and meet other writers. Join a Facebook group if you're always on Facebook. Look for places to hang out with other writers where you already hang out online. We can also be accountable to ourselves, though. We don't necessarily need other people. And one of the best way and easiest ways to do this is by making a progress chart. They're not just for kids, right? But if you do want to kind of break out the markers and the poster board and make your own poster progress chart, I think that would be the coolest thing ever. And I think you should tweet me pictures because I would love to see them. But we can also just use apps. The one I have here is prettyprogress.app, which has both free or paid options. But the key here is to reward the progress that you make. So, look at how far you've come and reward that. And when I say rewards, I don't mean big splashy purchases necessarily. They don't even have to be purchases at all. I remember a couple years ago, Yishan Lai was writing for us about her progress chart, and she said that one of her rewards was like a new tube of chapstick. It could be a goofy pair of socks. It could be whatever you want it to be. It can be goofy, childish, super small. It can be serious. Maybe you say, once I get to the halfway part in my manuscript, I'm going to purchase registration to a writing conference. So whatever you think works for you, be really creative. And again, they don't have to be monetary. You can say, if I get up early and I write for 5 Saturdays in a row, I get to take that 6th Saturday off, and I'm going to sleep in and do whatever the heck I want because I've earned it. For every 10,000 words we write, maybe we go on a writing field trip and we write at the beach or we write at the park. Or every 2,000 words we write, we get to rewatch an episode of Ted Lasso. Okay, so be creative when you're thinking of your rewards. It should be fun. We can also reward the act of writing itself through something called temptation bundling. And this was coined by Catherine Milkman, who was doing a study in 2014 about gym habits and studying 2 groups of people, one control group, of course, and then one group of people who had access to these really exciting, juicy audiobooks, but they were only found on devices found at the gym. So in order to find out what happened next in that audiobook, you had to go to the gym. And of course, the people who had access to these audiobooks formed longer lasting and more consistent gym habits than the people who did not. So what might this look like in your writing life? Dolly Chugg told us in an article earlier this year, let's say you hate revising and you keep putting it off. You take the thing you hate and you bundle it with something you love. So anytime you revise, you get to eat ice cream or take a hot bath or whatever. And you can actually use this with things that maybe you like to indulge in, but you're trying to cut back. So let's say if you are trying to cut back on your sugar consumption, but you still kind of love that daily can of Coca-Cola, you can still have that Coke, but only have it when you write. So in order to get the thing you love, you're spending time writing and you pair it with that thing you love, that indulgence. But maybe all of that said, you know yourself and you are much more of a stick person than a carrot person. There's an app for you called Stick. BeMinder is another one. And in these apps, basically you sign a commitment contract with yourself. And you say, I'm going to write 3,000 words a week, let's say, or I'm going to pay this app $20. You put your money on the line here. And the idea is that you'll be kind of motivated to reach the finish line so you don't have to pay the money, right? In fact, Stick will even let you pledge your money to an anti-charity, which is an organization who has views that you do not agree with. And of course, there are a lot of politically minded organizations to choose from, but it could also be something more lighthearted, like I'm going to give $20 to the Manchester United fan club, and I'm a big Liverpool fan. So that could be an option for you if you think that that's something you would respond to. Last on our list, of course, is information and confidence. And the reason these two are paired together is because a lot of times they stem from the same kind of feeling, which is that I am new at this. I am new here. I've never done this before. I don't know how my work is going to be perceived by others because I've never done this before, or I don't know how to move forward in my short story or my essay because I've never done this before. I don't know how to get it published, etc. Happily, there are 2 surefire solutions to this problem. And yes, they might take some time to resolve, but there are 2 avenues we can walk down. And number 1 is to seek out resources to improve our craft. And we'll talk more about this on the next slide. But number 2, we can also spend time in the company of other writers. So, what happens here is when we do spend time with other writers is that we learn organically based on what they're going through. And we also realize that we're not alone in our fears and lack of confidence. Every writer has fear. Every writer deals with rejection, I promise you. And by spending time with other writers, you will absolutely realize this. And you'll also learn, if somebody in your writing group is querying right now, you are going to learn a lot about that process and how to find an agent based on somebody else going through it or trying to go through it. But when it comes to resources, we are kind of spoiled for choice as writers. And I know that can be really overwhelming because we have to decide, should we hire a writing coach or just subscribe to a bunch of newsletters or go to a conference, keep attending webinars like this one or a workshop. The writer is actually doing our own workshop later this fall. So you have plenty of options, right? And I know it can be overwhelming. So I think what can be helpful is asking yourself some questions first, things like your time commitments and your learning styles, looking in other areas of our life and seeing how we can apply that to writing. So definitely consider answering all of these questions before you consider a resource to help you. But I also know that sometimes people just want to nudge, right? And especially when it comes to spending time with other writers, maybe you just want that kind of nudge forward, a place to start. So what I always say is please start local if you can. What conferences are happening in your area? Are there festivals? Is there a writing group that meets at your local library? What is happening with the people who write where you write? That said, I have lived in the middle of nowhere for far too long in my life to know that that is not an option for everyone, of course. And then I say start online, but start with genre. And this is also a terrific place to start if you kind of live in an area where you're spoiled for choice, like New York City or like Chicago, when there are just so many writing options out there for you. You don't know where to start. Again, start with genre. Start with the people who write what you like to write. And it's an excellent place to start. So that's your nudge. But maybe you don't want a nudge. Maybe you want a shove because there are so many resources out there. And you were just saying, Nicki, point me in a direction. All right, here's your homework. Go to the library and just check out one craft book. Books are such a good way to start. You will feel like you are improving your craft. You are learning from a published author, and you can do it all on your own time from the comfort of your own home. If you use the library, it is free. You are existing with someone who's a little more experienced than you on the written page, which is all where we like to hang out anyway as writers. It's very meta in that way to write about writing. I have worked on the internet for long enough to know that there's going to be somebody in the audience right now saying, I hate libraries, or I don't have a card and I have a feud with my local librarian and I'll never set foot in the library store. Okay. Your homework then is to buy a new or used copy of one of these books. The three on the left here that you see are probably the ones that we have heard most often over the years. You can tell they're classics. We have the 25th anniversary edition of Bird by Bird, the 20th anniversary. But if you're looking for a new classic, I would absolutely recommend Craft in the Real World, which is that book you see on the right there. And a lot of writers have recommended this book to us. I have read it. I think it's my favorite book that I've read in the last 10 years probably on craft. So I highly, highly recommend it. But if you are looking for something specific, I have more recommendations. If you're looking for, kind of the business side of writing, Jane Friedman Will Never Steer You Wrong. And that is Jane's book there to the left. If you are just completely bamboozled by platform and you don't know where to start, pick up Online Marketing for Busy Authors. If you're really struggling with rejection and you'd like to kind of meditate on that a little bit, I can't recommend The Promise of Failure enough by John McNally. And the book basically acknowledges that if rejection rather is such a huge part of writing, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we share rejection? So that book could be really helpful to you potentially. And lastly, we have Save the Cat, which is a classic resource for screenwriters if you are interested in that. But there is also a version called Save the Cat Writes a Novel that you might really enjoy. But maybe after all of that, you are still, just saying, okay, I found the time, I have the energy, and I just feel so stuck. And this is so frustrating because I can't get any work done with this big kind of pause and interruption of my life. I just feel so stuck. What I would encourage you to do then is to rethink that mindset, because I completely agree with Elizabeth Gilbert, bestselling author of Eat, Pray, Love, of course, who wrote, frustration is not an interruption of the process. Frustration is the process. The frustration, the hard part, the obstacle, the insecurities, the difficulty, the I don't know what to do with this thing now. That's the creative process. So stop seeing it as kind of an interruption, right? As a pause, as something that's keeping you from the work, and just acknowledge that being stuck is the work, Or put another way, as Jamie Attenberg reminds us, a good thing to remember is that our process takes many forms. So it could be reading a book or taking a walk or doing research. There are so many things that we can do to kind of get unstuck that don't involve putting words on the page. And she goes on to say, If you're working your way through something right now, it might be helpful to acknowledge the things you're doing that are benefiting your work, even if the words aren't showing up just yet. Make a list of the things you can do, are doing to benefit your mind and your creative process. So instead of just kind of sweating about all the things that we aren't doing right now or all the words that we aren't writing, we can make a list of the things we are doing, just like that progress chart, and see how far we've come, see what we're working on. But all of that said, maybe you're just feeling a little lackluster. Maybe you're feeling a little stale, and maybe that's because you haven't changed anything in your writing life. I don't think we should discount the power of how powerful a very small change can be. And I do this all year long. I have to do this all year long to kind of keep myself interested and engaged. I need to try reading somewhere new in the house or out of the house. I'll try a new genre. That's why I love NaPoWriMo. And there's so many ways to do this. We talked so much about writing challenges earlier and didn't mention that you can form your own writing challenge. You can say, next year, I'm going to write 50 stories in a single year, or I'm going to read one craft book every single month. And you can invite friends to your challenge, or you can just do it alone. You can make it an independent study. Another kind of really helpful thing, I think, is to look for calls for submissions. And if you're unfamiliar with this is basically when a literary journal or other publication will kind of put out a call and say, hey, we have this upcoming issue that has a theme of dreams, or it has a theme of horror, or we really want your travel stories. And then if you have something that fits that, or you want to write something that fits that call, it can be a powerful external motivator to kind of say, oh, okay, I'm going to answer this call for submission and maybe I'll get published too. We publish these calls for submissions from a variety of sources on our website. You can find them in our newsletter and in our magazine. So if you're looking for a place to start, you can definitely try that. And now I know it takes a little while to answer your questions. So if you're new to us, you can find a little question box on your GoToWebinar toolbar and go ahead and type in your questions there. And I know it always takes a little while to type them in. So while you are typing them, I will tell you that later this year, we have a special issue coming out this fall. It will be sold at Barnes & Noble, and I'm hoping on our website as well. It's called A Year's Worth of Writing Inspiration, and it will be a bunch of writing prompts to keep you inspired through all 4 seasons. We're really excited about that. And also, lastly, we have our writing workshop that's coming up in September. If you live in New England or you want to fly in and see us for the day, we would love to see you there. And now I am seeing questions coming in, and I would love to answer them. So our first question is actually about showing and not telling. Are there any resources for show not tell is our first question. And you know what, actually we have an article available. I believe it's published already on our website. It's called like the ultimate guide to show not tell. And what I'll do is when we send out the email that goes out after this webinar is over, I will include a link to that and you can read that. But it's I think it's a great article. I mean, of course I'm biased, but it has a lot of different authors sharing their best tips for showing and not telling. And it was really, really insightful when I read it. So I hope you enjoy it as well. Are there any specific conferences or writing retreats you'd recommend? Is our next question. Yes. I mean, obviously, I already mentioned the Writers Conference, so I'm not going to talk anymore about that. We actually, we did put a pause on it when the pandemic hit, just because so many people stopped attending conferences. But you can actually find what fellow readers of the Writer magazine have recommended in your state on our website. I will include that in the resources as well. I'll write down that list. But other than that, I think the Muse in the Marketplace, which happens in Boston, is a really incredible one. If you are looking for an agent or more, just information about everything. Actually, I have attended that one. I think it's terrific. The big kind of fish in the field is called AWP, and that is the by far and away the largest writing conference that I know of. It happens in a different location every year. There are discounted passes you can get for just Saturday if that is of interest to you. In terms of writing retreats, I am so biased. I live in Alaska. I love retreats that are really put me in this beautiful environment and an environment unlike one that I have at home. So I would actually say, if you don't know what kind of writing situation that you work best in, I would say choose something that's the complete opposite of what you currently write in now. Give yourself that big break. Look for something, if you live in the city, look for something in the country, or look for something in a city. There are writing retreats set at monasteries. There are so many out there, but just choose something that's opposite from where you currently are in order to provide that big change to start. So somebody is asking about the slides. You will actually receive a copy of the recording of this webinar. So not only will you get the slides that you can kind of fast forward and rewind, you'll also get my audio. Oh, okay. This is a great question. Our next one is, how do you stop writing? I've been writing a novel for years and I am just not sure it's done. Instead of polishing, I keep adding scenes. Maybe it's necessary, but I feel it feels like procrastination sometimes. I think it's a confidence problem. How do I know the difference between what's necessary and what's procrastination? This is such a terrific question. Thank you so much for spending the time to ask it and for feeling open to ask it because, you know, I think at this point, what I would really recommend for you is you need an outside perspective. You said you have been working on this novel for years, and there are two ways to do that. So what you can do is you can just put that novel, print it out. If you have a printer at home or go somewhere else, take that printout and lock it in a drawer. And I want you to lock it away for months. Okay. I want, oh gosh, let's see a minimum, 2 or 3 months if you can stand it, and then read it again and see if you can kind of get an outside perspective on what it needs or if it's done. And if that doesn't work and you still want to keep tinkering, even after you've locked it away from yourself for these couple months, give it to somebody else. Okay. It's time to go and join a writing group or get a critique partner, or hire a writing coach, whatever you need to do. But yeah, I at this point you might be it sounds to me like you're a little too close to it and you need that break, or you need the outside perspective of somebody else. So thank you for that question. That was terrific. Do I have any resources for fiction and poetry prompts? Absolutely, I do. So of course we mentioned that special issue we'll be putting out later. And the writer actually has a huge database of writing prompts on our website. You can go to writermag.com, hover over writing inspiration, and you'll find a bunch there. And for poetry especially, I would definitely recommend checking out NaPoWriMo, which I mentioned earlier. But there are even books and journals that just have plenty of fiction and poetry prompts. Look at your local library and see if there's a book of prompts that you can check out for free. Okay, this is a great question. I've been stuck for months now with a cultural appropriation issue that's paralyzing my writing. How do I get rid of this imposter feeling and go on? So a sensitivity reader is absolutely what I would recommend here. So find a reader, and sensitivity readers, as we remember, are always paid for their work and their expertise. But we find a sensitivity reader and we get their perspective based on their lived experiences and see if this cultural appropriation issue, if it really is kind of imposter syndrome, or if there's something real to that feeling there. But if you Google sensitivity readers database, you should find plenty out there. I can include that in our resources email as well. I will make a note to do that. So thank you so much for that question. And next is, oh, somebody, no question, but highly recommending cold turkey writer. Tremendous for maintaining or forcing focus. Absolutely. I've been resistant to kind of use distraction blockers at times in my life because I just feel like I should be strong enough and I should be able to power through it. And I don't have to. I can use apps and resources, and we shouldn't be afraid to use them. So thank you so much for one-upping cold turkey. Next question is, do I recommend any online writing conferences? Yes, I do. I think I've actually attended a bunch. I've presented at some, and I think you need to know going in, hopefully, if that'll work for you. So like, just even look at this webinar presentation, and did you kind of feel like this was an effective learning style for you? It was all online. You could do it from the comfort of your home in your pajamas, but maybe you really missed kind of the sight of me in person kind of delivering a presentation for you. So if you enjoyed this presentation today, I think you would get a lot out of online writing conferences. And what's more, the registration fees tend to be a little bit lower because they're not paying for an in-person space. So but if you feel like you really need to get out of the house, in real life, writing conferences are very much happening all year long, and you can find one in a state near you. Oh, a question, is this transcription I'm using built into GoToWebinar? No, this is actually, I'm using the one on PowerPoint, and it happens in real time, which we feel really lucky to have and to have available to us. So I'm looking to see, I'm going to do a last call for questions because I think I'm out here, but I'm happy if you have any questions about not being stuck, but any part of the writing life, I'm happy to answer them in the last couple questions we have. So I'll give everybody a minute kind of as a last call. And then we'll all go our separate ways. But regardless, thank you so much for joining us here today. I love doing these presentations. You all always ask such terrific questions, and I love answering them. So just give a couple more seconds to make sure there are no questions. Okay. Here's one. How do you know when it's time to give up? And it's a hard question and a hard question. And my answer, if it's just writing and writing is something you enjoy, it's never. The answer is absolutely never give up. There have been so many stories that we've published where writers has taken years and years and years of improving their craft, actively improving their craft, and have finally gotten published. If that's something that's a goal for you, we published an article in 2020 that featured a debut novelist who put out his novel at the age of, he was in his 90s when he put out his novel. So it's never too late. And I really don't think you should ever give up if getting published is a goal. I will also say that publishing is very fickle. And I wish that there was kind of a more straightforward path to navigating it and understanding it. But if writing is something you enjoy, you would never say to a runner, right, you should give up on running because you're not as fast as somebody else. No, absolutely not. If it's something you enjoy, please, please, please keep at it. Never, ever give up. Absolutely not. There are things we can do, though. I do think sometimes it's important to step away if we are feeling discouraged, because trying to write our way through that is only going to lead us into a patch of burnout. So yeah, never, never give up. Do I have a link for people who will act as mentors or editors, as I am unpublished and I feel I will need more on one-on-one guidance? Yeah, great question. So actually, if you go to writermag.com, we have a directory there where you can click on, editors and see a whole long list of editors that you can look for. You can look for editors and mentors in your state as well. Another option is to join a professional organization. Like, there are national organizations for memoir writers. There are ones for novelists, and you can join them and oftentimes find mentorship programs there. But yeah, if you just want one link, go to writermag.com and you will find that directory listings. I believe it's under resources for writers. And with that, I'm not seeing any more questions come in. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining me here today. It was an honor to present for you. I hope you learned something. And again, if you make that progress chart with your markers and poster board, please tweet at me at Nicki Porter on Twitter. I would love to see them. Thank you all so much for joining us.